The smell of burnt copper woke me up before the blackout did. 1 second my bedroom fan was humming against the summer heat, and the next the entire house dropped into dead silence, so complete I could hear rain tapping against the workshop windows 50 feet away. Then came the second sound, a sharp metallic snap outside. Not thunder, not a transformer blowing. Bolt cutters. I rolled out of bed so fast my bare feet slammed against the hardwood floor hard enough to sting. The digital clock beside my bed blinked 2:13 a.m. before going black completely. Outside, Willow Creek Estates looked soaked in moonlight and rainwater, rows of oversized suburban houses sitting perfectly still behind trimmed hedges and decorative stone mailboxes. But down near my detached workshop, blue sparks flickered against the dark like camera flashes. The air smelled wrong. Hot insulation, melted plastic, ozone. Anybody who's worked electrical for more than 6 months knows that smell instantly. It's the smell of expensive problems. I grabbed my flashlight from the kitchen drawer and stepped onto the back porch just as another shower of sparks burst near the utility pole beside my garage. Rain hit my face sideways with cold wind while gravel crunched beneath my boots. My dog Rusty started growling low in his throat before I even reached the fence gate. Then the flashlight beam landed on the cut line. My private power feed hung loose beside the transformer box, thick copper cable sliced clean through and still smoking in the rain. Somebody hadn't just vandalized my property. They knew exactly what they were cutting. That line powered my entire workshop, my tools, my backup batteries, my client equipment. 20 years of electrical contracting work sitting in darkness because somebody with bolt cutters and an HOA badge decided they didn't like the look of my setup. Then I saw the notice taped to my garage door. Bright yellow paper already curling from the rain. Unauthorized exterior electrical modifications. Violation of community standards. The signature at the bottom read Veronica Hale, HOA president. Of course it did. I actually laughed standing there in the storm with rain running down my face because only Veronica would destroy private infrastructure and leave paperwork behind like she thought she was doing community service. You ever meet somebody so convinced they're important that they confuse authority with ownership? That was Veronica Hale. White Mercedes SUV. Perfect blonde hair that never moved even in Texas wind. Perfume strong enough to hit you before her voice did. She ran Willow Creek Estates like a suburban kingdom built on landscaping fines and passive-aggressive threats. And for the past 6 months, she'd made it very clear she wanted me gone. According to Veronica, my white work van looked commercial. My workshop looked industrial. My backup solar batteries looked unpleasant. Never mind the fact that half the neighborhood called me whenever their breakers failed or their pool pumps died in July heat. To her, I was just the blue-collar electrician dragging down property values one extension cord at a time. Another flash of lightning lit up the backyard, and that's when I noticed something strange. The transformer beside my property wasn't humming anymore. Neither was the secondary line running toward the HOA clubhouse at the center of the subdivision. Everything was silent. My stomach tightened instantly, because I knew something Veronica didn't. 3 years earlier, before Willow Creek exploded into one of those copy-paste luxury developments with matching fences and decorative fountains, this entire section of land had been part of an old agricultural utility easement. My father helped install the original transformer grid back when this area was still cattle land and cedar trees. Most people in the neighborhood thought the HOA owned the infrastructure running under their streets. They didn't. A huge chunk of their electrical load still depended on the private easement crossing directly through my property, including the clubhouse, including Veronica's mansion. And if somebody tampered with the primary feed connected to that old transformer system without county authorization, automatic safety protocols could trigger a cascading shutdown across the entire sector. Right on cue, the lights died. Not just my house. Every single house across Willow Creek Estates blinked black all at once. Streetlights vanished. Pool lights disappeared. Decorative landscape lighting dissolved into darkness across 3 entire blocks. The neighborhood that normally glowed like a shopping mall suddenly looked abandoned. Then came the screaming. Garage doors stalled halfway open. Security alarms started chirping through the rain. Somebody down the street shouted about refrigerators shutting off. Another backup generator coughed once before dying completely. And right there in the middle of the storm, with cold rain dripping off the cut power line at my feet, My phone lit up with an incoming call from Veronica Hale herself. I stared at her name glowing on the screen while the entire subdivision sat powerless behind me, and for the first time all night, I smiled. Because Veronica thought she'd cut electricity to one electrician's workshop. What she actually cut was the backbone feeding her entire neighborhood. The first thing I noticed after the blackout was the silence. No air conditioners humming. No pool pumps rattling behind vinyl fences. No soft electrical buzz from the streetlights lining Willow Creek Boulevard. Just rain falling across dark rooftops and the distant sound of confused neighbors stepping onto porches trying to figure out why their perfect little subdivision suddenly looked like a ghost town. My phone kept vibrating in my hand, while Veronica Hale's name flashed across the screen over and over again. I let it ring, not because I was angry, because I already knew exactly what she was about to say. The moment people lose electricity, they start looking for somebody to blame. And in Willow Creek Estates, I had been the outsider since the day I moved in. I bought that house 2 years earlier after my divorce finalized and took just about everything except my tools and my last name. Funny how life works sometimes. One day you are sitting in a 4-bedroom house arguing over paint colors and vacation plans. The next you are eating microwave dinners alone in a folding chair because your furniture has not even arrived yet. The place I bought sat at the edge of the subdivision where the neighborhood backed up against old county land and utility easements nobody paid attention to anymore. Most buyers avoided it because of the workshop out back and the transformer poles running across the property. That is exactly why I wanted it. To me, the smell of sawdust and machine oil coming from a garage feels more like home than fresh paint and scented candles ever could. My father used to say you can tell the truth about a man by looking at his toolbox. Rusty tools mean excuses. Clean tools mean he never uses them. But worn tools with grease ground into the handles? That means responsibility. My father built substations across 3 counties before cancer took him at 58. I grew up riding in his truck before sunrise with thermoses full of burnt gas station coffee rattling in the cup holders while old country music played through blown speakers. Some kids grew up around baseball fields. I grew up around transformers humming in the summer heat and the smell of hot asphalt beneath utility poles. By 16, I could wire a breaker panel faster than most grown men. By 25, I had my master electrician license and enough scar tissue on my hands to prove it. That workshop behind my house was not some hobby garage. It was my business. Every shelf inside carried thousands of dollars in equipment. Copper spools, diagnostic meters, backup batteries, commercial tools. Half the custom solar systems in Willow Creek had passed through my hands at some point, including the backup lighting system inside the HOA clubhouse itself. That part always made me laugh. Veronica loved pretending my work looked cheap, while her entire luxury clubhouse literally ran on wiring I installed myself. Lightning flashed again above the neighborhood, washing silver light across rows of dark houses. I finally answered my phone while standing beside the cut line. Veronica did not even say hello. "What did you do?" she snapped. Her voice sounded different without electricity behind it. No confidence. No polished fake sweetness. Just panic wrapped in expensive lipstick. I leaned against the garage doorway and looked out toward the subdivision. Porch lights stayed dead. Garage doors, frozen halfway open, looked like broken jaws in the rain. Somewhere down the street a baby was crying while car alarms chirped weakly from drained backup batteries. "That depends," I said calmly. "Did your contractors cut a county-regulated feeder line tonight?" Silence. "Not long. Just long enough." "I have no idea what you were talking about," she answered quickly. There it was. The lie people tell before they realize paperwork exists. Rainwater dripped from the cut copper wire beside me while I studied the damaged connection with my flashlight. Clean cut. Industrial bolt cutters. Somebody who knew where the line ran. The problem was they only cut half the system. And electrical infrastructure does not forgive mistakes. Years earlier, the county allowed temporary residential expansion into Willow Creek before permanent grid upgrades finished construction. So developers piggybacked portions of the subdivision onto older agricultural transformer routes crossing private easements, including mine. Temporary became permanent because upgrading underground utilities costs millions. Easier to ignore it and hope nobody notices. Especially homeowners too busy arguing about mailbox colors and lawn height to understand where their electricity actually came from. Veronica's voice sharpened again through the phone. People are saying the blackouts started at your property. I almost smiled. Of course they were. Because in neighborhoods like Willow Creek, the blue-collar guy with a work van always becomes the easiest target. Well, I said quietly, that is where somebody decided to cut into the primary load balancing route. Another silence. Longer this time. Then I heard something in the background behind her. Generators failing. Residents yelling. Car doors slamming. Pure suburban panic. The entire neighborhood suddenly realizing luxury homes are just expensive boxes once the power disappears. I stepped inside the workshop and switched on my battery lanterns. Warm white light flooded across organized shelves and steel work tables while rain hammered the roof overhead. The smell of machine oil and cedar wood settled my nerves instantly. On the far wall hung the original county easement map framed behind glass. My father gave it to me the day I bought the house. I walked over slowly, studying the faded red utility lines crossing directly beneath Willow Creek Estates, like veins under skin. And right there at the center of the map sat the same transformer route Veronica Hale had just ordered someone to cut apart in the middle of a thunderstorm. By sunrise, Willow Creek Estates looked like the set of a disaster movie designed by people with too much money and not enough common sense. The rain had stopped, but thick gray clouds still hung low above the neighborhood, while residents wandered through dark driveways clutching coffee mugs and dead cell phones. Garage doors sat frozen halfway open. Sprinkler systems stayed silent. Decorative fountains at the clubhouse had stopped flowing for the first time in years. And parked right in the middle of it all was Veronica Hale's white Mercedes SUV shining like a trophy nobody wanted anymore. I watched the neighborhood wake up from inside my workshop while the soft hum of my battery backup system filled the air around me. That sound felt almost comforting now. Steady. Reliable. Unlike the people outside losing their minds because they had gone 6 hours without central air conditioning and internet service. My lantern cast warm light across rows of organized tools while rainwater still dripped from my jacket onto the concrete floor. I had not slept. Instead, I spent most of the night reviewing easement maps, utility permits, and county inspection records spread across my workbench beside a half-empty thermos of stale coffee. The deeper I looked, the uglier things became. Somebody inside the development company had delayed permanent infrastructure upgrades years earlier and quietly tied part of Willow Creek's electrical load into the old agricultural feeder routes crossing my property. Temporary bypasses, deferred inspections, load balancing shortcuts. The kind of corners people cut when they assume nobody paying HOA dues understands electrical law. Unfortunately for them, I did. Around 8 in the morning, headlights swept across my driveway. A silver golf cart rolled up first, followed by Veronica's Mercedes pulling in behind it. She stepped out wearing white designer jeans, oversized sunglasses, and a cream-colored jacket that probably cost more than my first work truck. The woman dressed for suburban warfare like she expected a camera crew to follow her around all day. Even standing in a powerless neighborhood, she somehow looked annoyed at the weather itself. Her heels clicked sharply across the wet concrete, while 2 HOA board members trailed behind her carrying clipboards and bottled water like nervous assistants following a celebrity meltdown. Veronica removed her sunglasses slowly when she spotted the lights inside my workshop still glowing. I could actually see the moment panic hit her. "Why do you still have power?" she demanded before even saying good morning. There it was again. That assumption. The belief that electricity simply appeared from walls like magic instead of infrastructure designed by people who actually understood systems. I leaned against the workbench calmly. "Battery backups," I answered. "Solar reserves too." Her jaw tightened instantly. Veronica hated my solar panels almost as much as she hated my work van. According to her, they looked industrial. Everything I owned looked industrial to her. My extension ladders, my utility trailer, my steel shelving. She once sent me a violation notice because she claimed the smell of machine oil drifting from my workshop affected neighborhood ambience. Ambience. Like the subdivision was a luxury spa instead of a development built on what used to be cattle pasture. Behind Veronica, the 2 board members exchanged nervous looks while the subdivision remained silent around us. No humming air conditioners. No electric gates opening. Just heat building slowly beneath heavy Texas clouds. "The residents are extremely upset," Veronica said, folding her arms tightly. "People are saying this outage started because of modifications you made to your property." I almost laughed at that. People always blame the visible worker before questioning the invisible system. It is easier that way. Easier to point at the electrician with grease on his hands than the HOA president standing beside. Illegally modified infrastructure. Veronica took another step forward, lowering her voice like she was offering me a private deal. If there is something on your property affecting the neighborhood grid, now would be the time to cooperate. There it was. Not concern. Not responsibility. Fear. She still thought I had caused this somehow. And more importantly, she still had no idea what her contractors actually cut through last night. I looked past her toward the clubhouse, sitting dark at the center of Willow Creek. Two maintenance workers stood near the decorative fountain arguing beside dead backup generators. Residents wandered around carrying melting bags of freezer food toward coolers packed with ice from the gas station down the highway. Somebody farther down the street tried starting a portable generator that immediately sputtered and died. The whole neighborhood smelled like wet mulch, gasoline fumes, and rising panic. Did you authorize contractors to access my utility easement? I asked quietly. Veronica hesitated. Tiny pause. Barely noticeable, but enough. The board approved landscaping improvements, she answered carefully. Landscaping improvements. That was what she called cutting through a county-regulated feeder route in the middle of storm season. One of the board members finally spoke up behind her. Older guy named Dennis who sold luxury kitchen remodels and spent HOA meetings complaining about mailbox paint shades. Sweat darkened the collar of his polo shirt despite the morning breeze. Can the power be turned back on today? He asked nervously. I looked directly at him instead of Veronica. That depends on what the county inspectors find. The silence after that felt heavy. Veronica's sunglasses slowly lowered in her hand while the meaning settled across her face for the very first time. Not all the way. Not yet. But enough for the confidence to crack slightly around the edges. Then my phone buzzed against the workbench. County Utilities Department. Incoming call. And suddenly the smell of panic hanging in Willow Creek Estates got a whole lot stronger. The county utility supervisor called me before I could say another word to Veronica. His voice crackled through the speaker over the sound of distant radio chatter and diesel engines. Ethan, tell me nobody touched feeder line 12 last night. I looked directly at Veronica while rainwater dripped from the edge of my workshop roof onto the gravel below. Her expression stayed controlled, but the color had started draining from her face. Somebody definitely touched it, I answered calmly. Cut through the private easement connection beside my transformer. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to make the air feel heavier. Then came a low curse followed by papers shuffling rapidly. Do not let anyone near that line. The supervisor said sharply. We are dispatching inspectors now. Veronica stepped closer immediately. This is ridiculous, she snapped once the call ended. You are acting like this is some kind of federal emergency. I looked past her toward the dark subdivision again. The heat was already rising off the sidewalks in visible waves now that the clouds had started breaking apart overhead. Without air conditioning, those giant stucco houses trapped heat like ovens. Residents stood in shaded driveways fanning themselves with HOA newsletters while refrigerator repair companies were suddenly getting flooded with calls. The smell of melting ice, wet grass, and overheated generators drifted through the neighborhood. You cut into a county-regulated electrical easement during storm conditions, I said evenly. So yes, it actually is an emergency. Veronica opened her mouth to argue, but another sound interrupted her. Diesel engines. 3 white county utility trucks rolled slowly into Willow Creek Estates one after another, yellow warning lights flashing silently in the morning sun. The moment residents saw official county logos pulling into the subdivision, the mood changed instantly. Panic always spreads faster once government vehicles show up. The trucks stopped directly outside my property while utility workers climbed out carrying insulated cases, survey tablets, and thermal imaging equipment. I recognized the lead inspector immediately. Hank Mercer, 62 years old, retired military electrician turned county infrastructure specialist, thick gray mustache, sunburned neck, walked like his knees hurt, but his patience hurt worse. Hank spotted me beside the workshop and shook his head slowly before even reaching the gate. Please tell me these people did not cut through feeder 12 without a shutdown permit, he muttered. Looks that way, I answered. Hank stared at the damaged line hanging beside the transformer box and let out a long breath through his nose. Well, he said quietly. That explains why half this subdivision went dark. Veronica stepped forward instantly, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. Excuse me. Our community was told this outage originated from unauthorized modifications on his property. Hank looked at her the same way an exhausted teacher looks at a student who confidently gave the wrong answer in front of the whole class. Ma'am, he said slowly, this line predates your subdivision by almost 30 years. He pointed toward the utility pole beside my workshop. That transformer balances overflow load from your western residential block. Somebody severed the balancing route, overloaded the emergency bypass system, and triggered automatic isolation protocols. Blank stares. Veronica blinked twice behind oversized sunglasses, clearly hoping complicated electrical words would somehow become somebody else's problem. Hank sighed and simplified it. Whoever cut this line accidentally shut down their own neighborhood. That was the moment residents started gathering around the street. Curious faces appeared from every direction now that county inspectors had arrived. Men in golf shirts. Women carrying Stanley cups filled with melting ice water. Kids sweating in wrinkled summer clothes because none of the televisions or gaming systems worked anymore. I noticed something interesting immediately. Nobody looked angry at me anymore. They looked confused. Confused people start asking questions. Dangerous questions. Veronica tried regaining control fast. The HOA authorized landscape maintenance near the easement, she said carefully. Perhaps your equipment was improperly marked. Hank actually laughed at that. Short, dry, not friendly. Ma'am, this is not landscaping equipment. He pointed at the clean cut through the feeder line. This was done intentionally with industrial cutters. One of the utility workers walked over holding a tablet displaying thermal readings from underground junction routes. Hank, he called out, you need to see this. We followed him toward the side of the transformer enclosure where utility maps glowed on the screen beneath the harsh Texas sun. Red overload indicators flashed beneath several sections of Willow Creek Estates. Hank studied the data for about 3 seconds before muttering another curse under his breath. No way, he said quietly. They never upgraded the western load. My stomach tightened instantly because I already knew what he was seeing. The developers had not simply borrowed temporary easement access years ago. They never replaced it. Entire sections of the luxury subdivision were still illegally dependent on outdated agricultural feeder infrastructure running directly across private county easements like mine, which meant Veronica's contractors had not just damaged one line. They exposed years of bypassed upgrades, deferred inspections, and permit violations. The kind of violations utility companies absolutely love investigating once paperwork starts moving. Veronica sensed the shift immediately. Her confidence started cracking around the edges now. Can this just be repaired today? She asked quickly. Hank looked at her over the tablet screen with complete disbelief. Lady, I cannot legally reconnect anything until we inspect this entire grid. Around us, the neighborhood fell strangely quiet again. Residents were listening now, really listening. And standing there beside the humming utility trucks with sweat running down her temples and sunlight glaring off powerless houses behind her, Veronica Hale suddenly looked less like the queen of Willow Creek Estates and more like someone realizing her empire had been built on borrowed electricity. The heat hit Willow Creek hard by early afternoon. Without air conditioning, those oversized luxury homes turned into brick ovens sitting under direct Texas sun. By 1 o'clock, the smell of spoiled food and overheated electronics had started drifting through the neighborhood every time somebody opened a front door. People who normally waved politely from golf carts were now arguing in driveways wearing sweat-soaked designer clothes while portable fans sat useless beside dead outlets. And through all of it, county utility crews kept digging deeper. Literally. Hank Mercer and his team spent hours tracing underground feeder routes across the subdivision while residents gathered in nervous little clusters pretending not to eavesdrop. The steady beeping of locator equipment echoed across the lawns while orange spray paint markings slowly spread through Willow Creek like warning signs nobody wanted to understand. I stayed mostly inside my workshop reviewing records while battery lanterns cast soft light across stacks of old permits and utility maps. Every few minutes, another county worker knocked on my door asking for copies of easement filings or historical inspection reports. The deeper they looked, the worse the situation became. Around 2:30, Hank walked into my workshop carrying a dirt-covered junction schematic and a look on his face somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief. "You were right," he muttered. "They never upgraded the western sector." I slid the coffee thermos toward him while he dropped the paperwork across my workbench. Sweat darkened his collar and dust coated his boots from hours spent digging near transformer access points. "How bad?" I asked quietly. Hank rubbed one hand across his face slowly before answering. 37 homes, the clubhouse, both gate systems, and half the street lighting are still tied into agricultural overflow infrastructure running through your easement. Even hearing it out loud made the room feel heavier. 37 luxury homes sitting on top of a grid setup that should have been temporary over a decade ago. Hank tapped one faded section of the map with his finger. These permits were supposed to expire after Phase 2 construction finished. But Phase 2 never happened, I said. Exactly. Outside the workshop window, another wave of frustrated residents gathered near the clubhouse parking lot, where HOA board members were trying and failing to calm people down. Somebody had started handing out bottled water from coolers while parents loaded melting groceries into car trunks, searching for hotels with working electricity. The entire subdivision smelled like hot concrete, gasoline fumes, and rising anger. Hank lowered his voice. "You know what the worst part is?" I already had a feeling. "They probably knew," I answered. Hank nodded once. "Slow. Grim. This kind of bypass does not stay hidden accidentally for 10 years. That was when the pieces finally started fitting together in my head. Veronica's obsession with controlling appearances, the endless violations about my workshop, the constant attempts to pressure me into removing solar backups and utility equipment from my property. She was not just embarrassed by how things looked. She was terrified somebody might eventually start asking questions about where the neighborhood's power actually came from. My phone buzzed against the workbench again. This time it was my daughter Lily calling from her mother's place across town. The second I answered, I heard the concern in her voice immediately. "Dad, are you okay?" "I am fine, sweetheart. Mom saw the neighborhood Facebook page. People are saying you caused the outage." I closed my eyes briefly and leaned against the workbench while the soft hum of backup batteries filled the room around me. Of course they were saying that. Because complicated infrastructure failures scare people. And scared people love simple villains. "I did not cause anything," I said calmly. "Somebody made a bad decision, and now the county is sorting it out." Lily hesitated for a second before speaking again. "You sound tired." I looked toward the framed easement map hanging beside my father's old lineman gloves on the wall. "Just busy." Grandpa would have called them idiots by now. That actually made me laugh for the first time all day. "Yeah," I admitted quietly. He definitely would have. After we hung up, I stepped outside just as another county truck pulled into the subdivision towing a portable transformer unit. The entire street seemed to freeze watching it arrive. Residents stopped arguing. Conversations died instantly. Because deep down, everybody knew utility companies do not bring in emergency transformer trailers unless something is seriously wrong. Veronica stood near the clubhouse entrance surrounded by sweating board members and angry homeowners while trying desperately to keep her polished image intact. But the cracks were showing now. Mascara smudged slightly beneath her eyes. Hair pulled tighter than usual. Voice sharper every time another resident demanded answers. The Queen of Willow Creek suddenly looked less like a confident HOA president and more like a politician realizing the cameras are still rolling after the script falls apart. Then came the moment everything shifted. One of the county excavation crews uncovered an old underground junction box near the decorative fountain beside the clubhouse. Rusted metal, illegal splice connections, temporary load bypasses patched together years earlier and hidden beneath landscaping stonework. Hank called me over immediately. The moment I looked inside the box, the smell hit first. Burnt insulation and overheated copper trapped underground for years. Somebody had overloaded this system far beyond what it was designed to handle. Hank pointed toward a cluster of unauthorized feeder taps buried beneath electrical tape and weatherproof foam. "This right here," he said quietly, "should never have passed inspection." Residents started crowding around behind us while county workers photographed everything. Phones came out instantly. People whispered to each other while staring at the exposed wiring hidden underneath the centerpiece fountain their HOA bragged about every Christmas. Veronica pushed through the crowd, trying to regain control. "This infrastructure predates the current board," she announced loudly. But nobody was listening anymore. Because once people see physical proof, fear turns into betrayal fast. And standing there beneath the brutal Texas sun with the smell of burnt copper drifting out of the ground beside her luxury clubhouse, Veronica Hale finally lost the one thing HOA tyrants depend on more than rules or fines: the illusion that they know what they are doing. By late afternoon, Willow Creek Estates had completely transformed from a luxury subdivision into a sweating, frustrated camp full of people realizing money does not fix infrastructure failures. The heat index pushed past 103 degrees, and without working air conditioning, temps started rising faster than the temperature. Residents dragged patio chairs into shaded driveways while extension cords snaked across sidewalks toward the few portable generators that still functioned. The steady drone of diesel engines mixed with barking dogs, crying toddlers, and the constant buzz of angry conversations echoing through the neighborhood. And sitting right in the center of all of it was the dark clubhouse fountain with county caution tape wrapped around the exposed junction box underneath. That fountain used to be Veronica Hale's favorite symbol of community pride. She mentioned it at every HOA meeting like it was some kind of architectural masterpiece instead of a decorative concrete bowl hiding illegal electrical work beneath it. Now people stood around taking pictures of it like tourists visiting the scene of a financial crime. I spent most of the afternoon helping Hank's crew trace the remaining overload routes feeding into the western block. Every time we uncovered another undocumented splice or bypass connection, the utility workers exchanged the same exhausted look. The kind professionals give each other when they realize a bad situation is actually much worse than they first thought. Around 4 o'clock, Hank handed me a clipboard while wiping sweat from his forehead with a grease-stained rag. "Take a look at this," he muttered. The document was an inspection waiver dated 8 years earlier during Phase 2 construction. Except Phase 2 had never been completed. More importantly, the signature authorizing temporary grid deferment belonged to a county inspector who retired 6 years ago under investigation for permit fraud. "No way," I said quietly. Hank nodded grimly. Temporary load balancing became permanent because somebody kept signing extensions nobody should have approved. The smell of hot transformers drifted through the air while utility crews opened another underground access panel near the western cul-de-sac. A few residents watched nervously from folding chairs nearby holding half-melted bags of ice against their necks. Nobody looked comfortable anymore. The illusion of perfect suburban control had completely collapsed. Veronica still tried pretending everything was manageable, but she was losing the crowd fast. Earlier that morning people listened when she blamed weather conditions and maintenance complications. By late afternoon, residents were openly questioning her in public. Why did contractors touch electrical equipment without county approval? Who hired them? How long has the HOA known about these bypasses? Every question chipped away another layer of authority. And the worst part for Veronica was that answers started appearing faster than excuses. One of the county workers uncovered archived maintenance records showing repeated overload warnings sent directly to the HOA board over the past 5 years. Another crew located undocumented junction modifications tied to clubhouse expansion projects approved under Veronica's presidency. It turns out luxury wine coolers, heated pool systems, and decorative landscape lighting consume a lot more electricity than cattle land ever did. Instead of paying millions for permanent upgrades, the HOA kept patching temporary systems together like cheap extension cords behind a Christmas tree. Around sunset, the entire neighborhood gathered near the clubhouse parking lot for what Veronica called an emergency community briefing. The air still felt thick and sticky even as the sunlight turned orange across the rooftops. Sweat rolled down faces while battery lanterns flickered beside lawn chairs and dead golf carts. Somebody passed around paper fans printed with real estate advertisements. The smell of warm bottled water and overheated asphalt hung everywhere. Veronica stood at the front beside folding tables covered with county paperwork, trying desperately to regain control of the situation. But she looked exhausted now. Hair pulled back too tightly. Makeup fading beneath the heat. Voice sharper every time another resident interrupted her. "The board is cooperating fully with county officials," she announced. "We expect temporary restoration efforts soon." That was when Hank stepped forward carrying a thick inspection folder under one arm. The entire crowd went quiet instantly. Utility workers tend to have that effect once neighborhoods realize they control whether lights come back on or not. Hank adjusted his reading glasses slowly before speaking. There will be no temporary restoration tonight. The silence that followed felt brutal. Somewhere in the distance, a child started crying again, while portable generators droned unevenly through the darkening subdivision. Hank continued calmly. County inspectors identified multiple unauthorized feeder modifications, illegal load bypasses, and serious code violations affecting public safety. Murmurs spread through the crowd immediately. Residents started turning toward Veronica now instead of me. That shift mattered. A lot. Hank opened the folder and removed several photographs from the afternoon excavation. Exposed wiring. Corroded splices. Temporary junction patches buried beneath landscaping stone. These conditions did not happen overnight, he said firmly. Somebody chose to ignore repeated infrastructure warnings for years. Veronica stepped forward quickly. The current board inherited many of these issues, she interrupted. But then Hank dropped the real bomb. Mrs. Hale, he said evenly, your signature appears on 6 separate deferred upgrade approvals tied directly to these modifications. The crowd erupted instantly. Questions flew from every direction while residents pulled out phones recording everything now. One woman near the front shouted that her husband worked from home and had already lost 2 clients because of the outage. Another demanded to know why HOA dues kept increasing if infrastructure was falling apart underground. Veronica tried speaking over the noise, but nobody cared anymore. Because once fear turns into betrayal, authority disappears fast. I stayed near the back beside the utility trucks watching the entire thing unfold beneath battery floodlights and fading sunset. The same residents who spent months avoiding eye contact with the electrician at the edge of the subdivision were suddenly staring at Veronica Hale like they had never really seen her before. And standing there in the thick Texas heat while her carefully controlled neighborhood unraveled around her one angry question at a time, she finally understood something my father taught me years ago beside an old transformer station. Systems can survive stress. What destroys them is neglect hidden behind confidence. Nights settled over Willow Creek Estates like a heavy blanket nobody could throw off. Without functioning streetlights, the entire subdivision looked unfamiliar in darkness. Expensive stone entry signs disappeared into shadows. Decorative landscaping lights stayed dead. The fountain beside the clubhouse sat silent beneath yellow county caution tape, while battery lanterns flickered across driveways like campfires in a suburban survival movie. The temperature outside still hovered near 90 degrees even after sunset, and the air smelled like hot pavement, generator exhaust, and frustration. By 9 o'clock, people had stopped pretending the outage was temporary. Residents dragged mattresses into living rooms near open windows searching for moving air. Restaurants 10 miles away started running out of ice because half the subdivision drove into town buying coolers and battery fans. Every few minutes, another social media notification buzzed across somebody's phone as neighborhood groups exploded with rumors, accusations, and leaked inspection photos from the exposed junction boxes. And right in the middle of all of it sat Veronica Hale's mansion, completely dark except for candlelight glowing behind the front windows. That image spread through Willow Creek faster than anything else. The woman who spent years policing mailbox colors and lawn edges suddenly looked powerless inside her own house. I stayed in my workshop going through old county records with Hank while utility crews continued emergency inspections outside under portable floodlights. The soft hum of my backup batteries mixed with the distant rumble of diesel generators across the subdivision. Papers covered nearly every surface around us now. Easement agreements, deferred upgrade filings, maintenance complaints, inspection warnings nobody addressed. The deeper we dug, the more obvious the pattern became. This was not simple negligence anymore. Somebody knowingly buried temporary electrical systems under permanent development projects while continuing to collect HOA fees supposedly meant for infrastructure improvements. Around 10:30, Hank slid a thick folder across the workbench toward me. "You need to see page 14, he said quietly. I opened it and immediately recognized Veronica's signature stamped across a contractor authorization request from 3 months earlier. Exterior landscaping renovation near Western Utility Corridor. The attached invoice included contractor names, equipment lists, and one specific instruction highlighted in yellow marker. Remove visual industrial elements near community edge. I stared at the page for several seconds while the smell of machine oil and old paper hung in the warm workshop air. Industrial elements, I muttered. Hank nodded once. Your transformer access posts. Your utility markers. Probably your feeder line warning signs too. Suddenly, the entire situation became painfully clear. Veronica did not just dislike how my property looked. She wanted the infrastructure hidden because visible utility markers reminded people the subdivision depended on systems older than the neighborhood itself. She wanted aesthetics, clean views, perfect landscaping, and somewhere along the way, somebody with a clipboard decided electrical law worked like decorating rules. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Dennis from the HOA board. His voice sounded shaky the moment I answered. Ethan, people are demanding another emergency meeting tonight. I leaned back against the workbench slowly. And Veronica wants you there. Of course she did. By now she needed somebody else standing beside her when the residents started asking harder questions. 20 minutes later, I walked toward the clubhouse beneath portable construction lights while utility crews continued excavating sections of sidewalk nearby. The whole neighborhood felt different now. Less polished. More honest somehow. Sweaty residents sat outside fanning themselves with HOA newsletters while children chased fireflies through dark cul-de-sacs because televisions and gaming systems still did not work. The artificial perfection Willow Creek obsessed over had finally cracked open under pressure. Inside the clubhouse, battery lanterns cast pale yellow light across rows of folding chairs packed with exhausted homeowners. The air felt thick from body heat and stale air conditioning ducts sitting useless overhead. Veronica stood near the front clutching a stack of papers so tightly her knuckles looked white beneath the lantern glow. The second I entered the room, every conversation stopped. I could feel people watching me now very differently than before. Not as the electrician at the edge of the subdivision. As the guy who understood what was actually happening beneath their streets. Veronica forced a tight smile when I approached. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. I noticed her expensive perfume could not completely hide the smell of stress sweat anymore. Small detail, but real. Dennis started the meeting with shaky updates about ongoing inspections and county coordination before immediately getting interrupted by angry residents demanding answers. Where did our HOA money go? How long were these violations hidden? Why did contractors touch utility lines? Questions hit from every direction now. No polished speeches could stop it anymore. Finally, Veronica stood and raised both hands trying to regain control. The board acted based on professional recommendations, she announced. No one anticipated this outcome. That was when Hank walked into the room carrying a black equipment case under one arm, and complete silence followed him, like weather moving through the building. He set the case on the table beside Veronica and opened it slowly. Inside sat enlarged photographs from the excavation site. Illegal feeder taps. Corroded overload splices, county warning notices, and right on top sat a high-resolution image of the severed power line beside my workshop, cleanly cut with industrial equipment. Hank looked directly at the room, full of sweating. Homeowners before speaking. This outage was not caused by weather, he said calmly. It was triggered when unauthorized contractors tampered with a protected electrical easement connected to an overloaded temporary grid system that should have been replaced years ago. You could actually hear people breathing harder after that. The room felt electrically charged even without power. Then Hank dropped the final piece onto the table. A contractor authorization form signed by Veronica Hale herself. The same signature authorizing landscaping modifications inside the utility corridor the night my feeder line got cut. Veronica's face lost color instantly beneath the lantern light while residents leaned forward in stunned silence. And standing there inside a powerless clubhouse surrounded by people finally realizing their luxury neighborhood had been running on hidden shortcuts and cosmetic lies for years, Veronica Hale looked exactly like what she really was underneath all the polished confidence. Somebody who thought appearance mattered more than infrastructure until the lights went out. The clubhouse exploded into noise the second residents saw Veronica's signature sitting on that contractor authorization form. People started talking over each other so loudly the battery lanterns hanging from the ceiling actually rattled slightly from the vibration in the room. Sweat, frustration, and betrayal filled the air thicker than the Texas heat outside. Somebody near the back shouted that they had paid over $800 in special infrastructure assessments last year alone. Another resident demanded to know why the HOA approved landscaping projects while ignoring electrical upgrades buried under the neighborhood. Veronica kept trying to speak, but every sentence got drowned out faster than the last one. The polished suburban control she spent years building was collapsing in real time under fluorescent battery lights and overheated tempers. I stayed near the side wall beside Hank while residents crowded around the inspection photos spread across the folding tables. The room smelled like warm plastic, stale air, and exhausted people who had spent nearly 20 hours without electricity. Every few seconds, another cell phone flashlight switched on as homeowners zoomed in on exposed underground wiring hidden beneath their decorative fountain. One older man in a golf shirt stared at the photos for several long seconds before muttering, "This looks like something patched together behind a carnival ride." Honestly, he was not wrong. Hank opened another inspection folder and removed thermal imaging scans showing overloaded feeder routes running beneath Willow Creek's western block. Bright red sections glowed across the printouts like infected veins. These systems were never designed for this much residential demand, he explained calmly. The temporary balancing routes should have been replaced years ago. Veronica finally snapped. "You keep saying temporary like the current board created this problem," she said sharply. "We inherited most of these systems." Hank did not even blink. "Maybe," he answered. "But your board approved continued load deferments instead of mandatory upgrades." Then he slid another document across the table. Maintenance recommendations. Deferred. Safety warnings. Deferred. Upgrade requirements. Deferred again. Every signature at the bottom belonged to Veronica Hale. The room went dead silent for about 3 seconds after that. Then the anger turned personal. Residents stopped talking about the outage itself and started talking about money. HOA dues, landscaping budgets, clubhouse renovations, security gate upgrades. Somebody near the front pulled up financial statements on their phone and started comparing yearly maintenance fees against infrastructure spending. Turns out Willow Creek spent more money replacing decorative shrubs over the past 3 years than upgrading electrical systems feeding half the subdivision. That realization hit the room like a pressure wave. Veronica's face tightened instantly. Those decisions were made based on aesthetic and property value priorities, she argued. Big mistake. The second she said aesthetics while the room sat sweating in 90-degree heat without electricity, several residents actually laughed out loud. Not happy laughter either. The kind people make when they realize somebody important has been unbelievably stupid. Outside the clubhouse windows, county crews continued working beneath portable floodlights while diesel generators hummed through the darkness. Utility workers moved between excavation sites wearing reflective vests coated in dirt and sweat, while exhausted homeowners watched from folding lawn chairs lining the sidewalks. The entire neighborhood looked stripped down to its bones now. No decorative lighting, no fountain noise, no polished illusion, just infrastructure, real systems, real consequences. Then Dennis stood up slowly from his chair near the front. He looked pale beneath the lantern glow. "There is something else everyone should probably know," he said quietly. Every eye in the room turned toward him instantly. Dennis swallowed hard before continuing. The board approved the landscaping contractors near Ethan's property because Veronica believed the utility markers and transformer access poles were lowering visual appeal at the neighborhood entrance. Murmurs spread immediately. Veronica's eyes widened toward Dennis like she could not believe he actually said it out loud. But once people start talking during panic, loyalty disappears fast. Dennis kept going. The contractors were instructed to clean up the area before next month's regional real estate showcase. There it was. The entire disaster reduced to appearance management. Veronica wanted the subdivision looking prettier for wealthy visitors touring luxury homes. So somebody removed warning signs, tampered with protected utility corridors, and cut through infrastructure they did not understand. All because exposed electrical equipment looked unpleasant beside decorative stone landscaping. A younger resident near the back stood up holding his dead laptop under one arm. "My wife lost 2 days of remote work because of this," he said angrily. "Do you realize people trusted you?" Others joined in immediately after that. Food spoilage, hotel costs, medical equipment battery concerns, business losses. Complaints started piling on top of each other faster than Veronica could answer them. She looked overwhelmed now. truly overwhelmed for the first time since this started. Gone was the polished HOA president correcting mailbox violations from behind oversized sunglasses. In her place stood a woman realizing her own residence might sue her into financial ruin before county investigators even finished their reports. Then Hank's radio crackled sharply at his belt. He listened for several seconds before his expression hardened. "You have got to be kidding me," he muttered. He looked toward me immediately. They found another unauthorized bypass behind the clubhouse pool system. The room erupted again. Somebody actually shouted, "How many illegal connections are under this neighborhood?" Hank answered honestly, "We still do not know yet." That sentence hit harder than anything else all night. Because people can tolerate mistakes. What they cannot tolerate is uncertainty underneath their homes. I looked around the clubhouse while angry residents crowded around tables covered with inspection photos and deferred safety notices. Battery lanterns flickered across sweating faces while outside the dark subdivision stretched beneath silent utility poles and powerless streets. And standing there in the middle of a collapsing luxury neighborhood built on shortcuts, Veronica Hale finally looked exactly like what she had spent years trying to hide from everyone else. Somebody completely out of her depth, pretending control mattered more than competence. The first light came back on at 6:42 the next morning. Just one porch lamp near the eastern entrance flickering weakly against the gray dawn before glowing steady. Then another house lit up. Then another. One by one, sections of Willow Creek Estates slowly crawled back to life beneath the hum of temporary transformer trailers and county repair crews working through the night. The sound of air conditioners kicking on again rolled through the subdivision like distant applause. People actually stepped outside clapping when their refrigerators started humming again. Funny thing about electricity. Most people never think about it until silence replaces it. I stood beside my workshop holding a paper cup of burnt gas station coffee while the morning air carried the smell of wet dirt, diesel exhaust, and fresh asphalt from excavation crews patching sections of road they tore open overnight. County utility trucks still lined the streets, but now the atmosphere felt different. Less panic. More embarrassment. Residents walked slower this morning. Quieter too. Nobody cared about mailbox colors anymore. Nobody cared about landscaping standards. Turns out surviving 28 hours without power resets a neighborhood's priorities pretty quickly. Hank climbed down from one of the transformer trailers with dark circles under his eyes and grease streaked across his gloves. "Eastern grid is stable," he said before taking the coffee cup I handed him. "Western block still needs permanent rewiring." I nodded toward the clubhouse where county inspectors continued carrying boxes of records out through the front doors. "And the HOA?" Hank let out a tired laugh. "That situation is way above my pay grade now." He was not kidding. Overnight, the county infrastructure investigation exploded into something much bigger than a neighborhood outage. Deferred inspections, unauthorized contractor access, illegal feeder bypasses, financial misuse tied to infrastructure maintenance funds. By sunrise, 2 county attorneys and a state utility compliance officer had already arrived at Willow Creek. The same subdivision that spent years obsessing over appearances suddenly had government sedans parked across every entrance. Veronica Hale's mansion remained completely dark, not because the power could not be restored, because county inspectors disconnected her property separately pending investigation into unauthorized contractor directives. That detail spread through the neighborhood faster than any rumor ever had. People whispered about it while collecting bags of melted groceries from curbsides. The woman who weaponized HOA rules against everyone else was now sitting in the only dark house on the block because of her own decisions. There was something poetic about that. Around 9 o'clock, Dennis walked across the street toward my workshop carrying a cardboard file box against his chest. He looked exhausted, shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, like a guy who suddenly realized suburban politics are not worth this much stress. "I resigned this morning," he said quietly. I believed him immediately. He handed me the box. Inside sat copies of HOA maintenance budgets, deferred upgrade recommendations, contractor communications, and meeting notes going back nearly 6 years. "People deserve to know where their dues actually went," he muttered. The smell of old paper and stale cigarette smoke drifted out of the box as I flipped through the files. Landscaping enhancements, fountain redesigns, decorative gate lighting, seasonal flower contracts. Meanwhile, every infrastructure warning kept getting delayed because permanent electrical upgrades were considered too expensive for the annual budget. They spent hundreds of thousands making the neighborhood look luxurious while hiding a failing electrical backbone underground. Dennis rubbed both hands across his face slowly. Veronica honestly believed appearances kept property values high enough to outrun the problems. Infrastructure always catches up eventually, I answered. My father used to say that too. Systems do not care about optimism. Copper either handles the load or it does not. By noon, most of the neighborhood had partial power restored through temporary county routing systems. Portable transformers hummed beside curbs while utility workers replaced damaged sections of feeder line near my easement. Residents actually brought cold drinks and sandwiches out to the crews now instead of complaining about parked work trucks. Funny how quickly people start respecting blue-collar labor once comfort disappears. Lily arrived around lunchtime with her mother to check on me. The second she saw county crews rebuilding sections of the grid beside my workshop, her eyes widened. You were right, she whispered quietly while staring at the excavation trenches. I smiled tiredly. I wish I had not been. She walked beside me toward the restored transformer enclosure where fresh warning signs and new county seals now surrounded the utility corridor. Mom said the whole neighborhood Facebook page turned against the HOA overnight, she said. People are posting old violation letters and budget screenshots. I looked toward the clubhouse where residents crowded around bulletin boards reviewing emergency notices from county officials. Turns out people hate being lied to more than they hate extension ladders. Lily laughed at that. Soft. Genuine. First real laugh I had heard in days. Around 3 that afternoon, Veronica finally appeared outside her house. No designer jacket. No oversized sunglasses. No polished performance voice. Just a tired woman standing in her driveway, watching utility crews restore power to everyone except her property. County investigators escorted her into an unmarked sedan nearly 20 minutes later for formal questioning related to contractor authorizations and infrastructure compliance records. Nobody cheered. Nobody yelled. Residents just watched quietly from shaded porches while the car pulled away beneath functioning streetlights that had finally come back online. The subdivision looked different now. More real somehow. Like the blackout stripped away all the fake perfection people spent years maintaining. 3 weeks later, the HOA board dissolved entirely pending financial restructuring and state review. County utility contractors permanently rebuilt the western feeder system using modern infrastructure instead of hidden bypasses. And me? The same workshop Veronica spent months trying to hide became the temporary coordination site for the entire reconstruction project. Every morning, utility crews parked outside my property drinking coffee while transformers hummed steadily across a fully stabilized grid. Sometimes at night, I still sit on the back porch listening to the sound of electricity moving properly through the neighborhood again. Clean, balanced, honest. My father was right about systems after all. You can ignore warning signs for a while. You can paint over problems. You can hide ugly infrastructure behind fountains and landscaping. But eventually reality shows up with floodlights, inspection crews, and paperwork. And when it does, the truth always comes out once the lights go off.